vows. Here's a chapter on vows. Moses said to the... Now, we have this idea of vow in our culture to some degree. You know, we still to this day have the president put his hand on a Bible and say, I vow to do this or that, whatever. I swear. We don't really follow that anymore. No one really pays attention to these sorts of things anymore. We still have that lingering holdover in our culture. So we understand conceptually the concept of a vow. But this is basically dedicating something in service to the Lord, or dedicating that you're going to do something for the sake of the Lord, or like promising the Lord that you're going to render some kind of special service or offering to Him. And we are going to see this happen in the culture in the stories to come. And Jesus eventually is just going to say, don't bother with this. You know, like there's no need really to make these kinds of special vows. Just make your yeas, yeas, and your nays, nays. That's part of the Sermon on the Mount. That's part of how He's trying to change our minds about some of the things that we've had ingrained in ourselves for so long. Saying that there really isn't a need to take these special vows to dedicate yourself or dedicate yourself to some specific task or service. Just do it. Say you're going to do it and do it. Do what you say you're going to do. Anyway, Moses said to the heads of the tribes of Israel, this is what the Lord commands. When a man makes a vow to the Lord, or takes an oath to obligate himself by a pledge, he must not break his word, but must do everything he said. One of the worst things you could do was make a vow in the name of the Lord and then not fulfill that vow. That's actually what it means to take the Lord's name in vain. We think of taking the Lord's name in vain as using the Lord's name as some sort of expletive or a curse word. And there is an element of that in there to be true. You know, like that's not entirely incorrect. But it is kind of short-sighted, because the real meaning of taking the Lord's name in vain in their culture, and as the commandment itself was originally given to them and how it would have originally applied to their culture, is don't take a vow in the name of the Lord and then not fulfill the terms of the vow, because then you're taking the Lord's name in vain. That's really what it means. And that's one of the worst things that you could do. You know, making a vow in the name of the Lord pretty much binds you to that vow. And if you don't fulfill that vow, then you're in trouble. Then you're in some serious trouble. When a young woman still living in her father's house, so she hasn't been married yet, makes a vow to the Lord, or obligates herself by a pledge, and her father hears about her vow or pledge, but says nothing to her. Basically, he assents to it. He's okay with it. Then all her vows and every pledge by which she obligated herself will stand. But if her father forbids her when he hears about it, so he does not agree with the pledge she has made, none of her vows or the pledges by which she obligated herself will stand. The Lord will release her because her father has forbidden her. If she marries after she makes a vow, or after her lips utter a rash promise by which she obligates herself, and her husband hears about it but says nothing to her, then her vows or the pledges by which she obligated herself will stand. So now she's under the authority of her husband, not her father. And if he chooses not to interfere in the vow, then the vow is still binding. But if her husband forbids her when he hears about it, he nullifies the vow that obligates her, or the rash promise by which she obligates herself, and the Lord will release her. Any vow or obligation taken by a widow or a divorced woman will be binding on her, so she does not have a male guardian to overturn her vows if she makes one, if she's widowed or divorced. If a woman living with her husband, this is just a married woman, a wife, makes a vow or obligates herself by a pledge under oath, and her husband hears about it but says nothing to her and does not forbid her, so he assents to it essentially, then all her vows or the pledges by which she obligated herself will stand. But if her husband nullifies them when he hears about them, then none of the vows or pledges that came from her lips will stand. Her husband has nullified them, and the Lord will release her. Her husband may confirm or nullify any vow she makes, or any sworn pledge to deny herself. So she's saying, I don't want anything to do with something. And this is a vow that a man could make too, but basically it's like if I'm vowing to dedicate myself, like a Nazirite vow. The Nazirites made a vow. They swore they could not have any kind of fermented drink at all. Now normally they could. If you were a regular Israelite going about your business, that was not forbidden to you. But if you were taking a special Nazarite vow, which you read about earlier, you couldn't have any kind of fermented drink. Or anything that you said, I'm not going to have. That's what we call fasting, basically. Today we have this concept of fasting. We're not really required or asked to fast today, but we still kind of have that in our culture. And we normally think of it in terms of food, and it certainly could apply to food. But it could really be just about anything. You could make a vow to deny yourself of just about anything that you would normally find pleasurable, and that normally wouldn't be forbidden. So that's what it means to make a vow to deny yourself. But if her husband says nothing to her about it from day to day, then he confirms all her vows or the pledges binding on her. He confirms them by saying nothing to her when he hears about them. So basically he just agrees to it. He doesn't stop it. If, however, he nullifies them sometime after he hears about them, then he is responsible for her guilt. These are the regulations the Lord gave Moses concerning relationships between a man and his wife, between a father and his daughter, his young daughter, still living in his house. So very much the husband was in control of the relationship. Only for a woman who was widowed or divorced did she have the final word on her own vows. If she was with her husband had the final word on her vows, and if she was living with her father had the final word on her vows. And so that is definitely an example of the very strongly paternal culture, patriarchal culture they lived in at that point in time, very much so.